We're going to have a chat about teams and culture and all that good stuff. And you are both, and Jim as well, have a really interesting journeys into your startup worlds. And so we want to dig into those. So before we get into your stories, I just wanted to ask up front to think of share a tool, something you use regularly in your team that's really helpful. Molly, have you got one?
Mine is incredibly boring. It would always be Slack. So
why do you love Slack in your team?
So we are very flexible, as when I introduced myself, it would make sense that we are. We work around core hours of sort of 11 till 3, but everybody else is kind of on and off and doing their work as they see fit. And so we work quite asynchronously. We have about 1 meeting a week internally, I think. And so having Slack, being able to leave voice notes, being able to keep on top of everything in the different channels means that we both can be a really productive team, but also build a bit of a culture of getting to know each other and being a bit silly and having a laugh in some of the other channels rather than it all being via email, which I think doesn't have any personality. Yeah,
you can't do it in real time, can you? So I get the upsides of what you're saying about Slack, and I'm fascinated to hear more about your work, your really innovative work culture. But the Slack also can feel like one of those tools that's always on, right? So there's notifications, there's a whole like social channels. So how do you manage that so you're not distracted by it?
I think it really depends on like what your idea of, I prefer the term like work-life blend than work-life balance, and how you manage that. So for me, I actually don't mind my notifications always being on, because it means that I can go to the gym at lunchtime and I can walk the dog and do some washing and manage my time as I want to and keep on top of everything at the same time. But equally, we have other members of the team who don't have it on their phones. They just work 8 in the morning till 5, and then that's them done. And they know themselves very well. And I think there's a lot of, especially in the media at the moment, when people talk, it's been like, oh, we shouldn't be able to send out of hours emails and all of this. I think there's a lot of kind of negative attention and a lot of focus put on the company to manage that. Whereas I think actually half of it is also the responsibility is on yourself to know yourself and to know how you should manage your own workload. Yes, the company shouldn't be ringing you at 11 o'clock at night because you haven't done something or contacting you on holiday. But as long as there are fair boundaries, then I think that the onus is on people to understand themselves and to understand how they work best.
Now, Hector, listen, I just asked Molly for a tool, and we've already got like a workplace philosophy for the 21st century, which is it. I feel like we can wrap this up in a minute. What a start. Thank you, Molly. Hector, is Slack your go-to tool for your team, or is there something else that you find more valuable?
Yeah, we do the kind of communication on Slack. I'm a no notifications man myself, but I agree with Molly that everyone's different in that regard. In terms of, I'll give you a tool, but then also what I actually find more useful. So a tool that worked well at my previous startup, if you're a bit bigger, there's a tool called Donut, which is just connects random people on Slack each week. And it's just a good way, the idea is you have a 15-minute chat or virtual coffee, especially when a team's remote. It actually just kind of, helps you, introduce you to the human elements of the people in the business and kind of builds empathy. So that works well for a tool. But in terms of where we are now, one thing I found that I'm trying to get better at doing is just kind of being really transparent about the business. So I think, fundamentally, we can talk a lot about this, and I'm sure we will, that you're bringing people in and you're kind of, trying to trust and empower them. And I think to do that, you really need to, it really helps to give everyone a great understanding of what's happening. So it's very easy in startups to kind of silo and, for example, your sales team or your marketing team have no idea what's going on in finance or, what's happening with the product things. And, everyone should really know the good and the bad. I think you've obviously got morale management as well. But I just think, being transparent upfront about everything is just the best way to get everyone pulling in the same direction.
Awesome. So let's do some storytelling. I know Jim is trying his best to join this conversation, but he just can't quite get into the party yet. Hi, Lisa from Mighty Minds, who is developing a virtual reality mental wellbeing app for children through sport. That's a pitch in a sentence, isn't it? And also Leah is doing, what's Leah doing? V-Buddies World, VR platform connecting native speakers to exchange languages, culture, and knowledge. So some really interesting. Natalie Pierce is here, of course, who was with us before, and she'll share what she's up to from the Future Kind Collective. So Molly, now you've got a hell of a story, but tell us, I know we can't share it all in one go tonight, but tell us about your journey into starting Flexa and how you've brought people together and the culture you've built.
Yeah, how do you unpick that?
Go back to the start.
I think that there are two types of founders, and I might be being reductive in this, but I've seen two types. There are the types that really they want to be a founder and they're just waiting for the right idea or to meet the right person to become a co-founder with, and like their life's mission is to start a business. And then I think there's the other type of founder where you don't expect to necessarily start something. You have an idea and you start running with it and you think, oh, maybe I'm onto something, and then it snowballs and it's too late. And I am definitely in the latter bucket.
So the accidental entrepreneur.
I mean, like in hindsight, when I look at the fact that I had the attention span of a fly and didn't really stay at a job for longer than about 9 months, maybe I should have considered it before. But I started off my career after leaving university. I went into investment banking, which is not the most notoriously creative nor entrepreneurial profession. But I also have an autoimmune disease that means I'm technically classified as disabled, and sometimes I can't walk. Back then it was about once a week where like my feet would just swell up and stop me walking, whereas now thankfully it's only once or twice a year. The beauty of flexible working and managing your own time. But when I asked to work from home once a week in investment banking, I was sacked straight away. Settlement package.
How far back are we going, Molly?
2016.
So not far at all. You were sacked for asking for flexible working opportunity.
Yeah. Settlement package put in front of me, told me leave immediately, couldn't even get my stuff, wasn't even allowed back in the office, nothing. It was such an awful thing to have done, according to them. And then I didn't realize at the time, but that's where the idea for Flexa kind of started. So I went through job hunting, found it incredibly difficult to find out exactly what it was like to work somewhere. To Hector's point of transparency, like I think you can start being transparent from the very beginning of someone engaging with your company with the idea to hire them. You know, you want to let them self-select what is on offer at your company, how are you going to work, what are they going to get from you. And that is exactly what Flexa is, and that's what it became. So we launched in February of 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And Flexa is a platform that highlights all of the information about how you will work at a company. So whether it's remote first or dog friendly or completely flexible hours or work from anywhere schemes, and that's all verified by employees at that current company. So it enables companies to showcase their brilliant work environments and build their employer brand, but also people to find out exactly what is going to be on offer at that company and find their perfect working environments. So we launched in 2020. We've now just closed the seed round. So I think we've raised about just over £3 million in total in fundraising. And we are now a team of 10 and about to be a team of 15 in 2 months.
Oh, wow. That's a big step up. Jim, we're going to stick with your story, Molly, but I just want to say hi to Jim.
Hello, I'm so sorry I'm late. We were having a few technical challenges at this end.
What do you do with someone who turns up to a meeting 15 minutes late in your company, Molly?
They kind of probably just seamlessly join because we have about one meeting a week. So we just be like, oh, they've appeared. That's fine.
There you go, Jim. You're all right. Jim, we saw you for the last 15 minutes dialing in, and you know the machine's not helping. So thank you for being persistent and welcome. It's great to have you. So Jim's from co-founder of Betterspace, which I've been learning about because we've been we're on there with Rebel Book Club. So we'll come to you in a minute, Jim. So don't go away. But Molly, so you gave us a fantastic introduction to how you started in the journey and what's motivated you, and then you sort of leapt forward to obviously where you are now, which is a really exciting stage we want to explore. But let's dwell a little bit on that. The first step in terms of, you say so you started Flex with someone else?
My then boyfriend, now fiance.
Right.
So everyone always makes that same face. It's so funny.
I work on one of the business I work in. I work with a couple, so there's not 3, there's 4 of us co-founders, and 2 of them are a couple, and it works great. So, you know.
So we started that as a couple. Again, neither of us, we were both accidental entrepreneurs, and I think we were accidental co-founders together as well. It was actually Morris's idea. He was like, well, why we could create this platform. And he was leaving his job at the time. And I remember the time at which it sort of suddenly became real was he was talking about it a lot, and he'd actually handed in his notice with nothing else to do afterwards. He had a 3-month notice period, so I think he was like, I'm done. And I came home with a giant whiteboard one day and was like, you might as well start putting some ideas on it.
Here we go, date night with the whiteboard.
Oh yeah, all of our dates revolve around Flexa, Mike. We never stopped talking about it, but that was where it definitely started and became a bit more serious. But neither of us are technical.
And in that when you started to get serious about like we could build this or we could go for this together, did you establish rules straight away? We're like, okay, relationship over here, business partners over here. You were just like, let's see what happens.
I'm not really one for boundaries, as you can tell from my approach to notifications and things. I find it much easier to let everything be. But I know that I'm quite unusual in that. No, we established no boundaries. We didn't even know who was going to do what. We just ran with it and it worked somehow. But I know that that's obviously quite unusual. I think it's because Morris and I think about things in quite a similar way, but we have very different skill sets. So when we handle stress in the same way, we handle situations in the same way. So it was like 2 people working on 2 different things, but with a very similar mindset and outlook. And that was why it worked.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because this idea of trust building and transparency, as you alluded to, Hector, earlier, is very similar to what a good, healthy relationship in life is all about. And so it's a similar thing in business. And yet a lot of people are like, well, why would you go in with your best friend or even your partner? That's crazy. Yeah. We recently interviewed for the podcast at Virgin StartUp 2 very successful startup founder couples, Oddbox, Deepak and Emily, and then Flashpack, Radha and Lee. And Radha and Lee started with a first date, in business plan. It's a great story to listen to. So plenty of you out there proving that wrong. Yeah. We'll come back to where you are today in the next stage, Molly. But Hector, take us back to what kicked off Unplugged.
Yeah. So if I take you back a little further, then out of university, I failed to get on a grad scheme, which was a blessing in hindsight. And so a friend of mine said, why don't you just apply for a startup, work there for a year, and then you can apply again next year for all the grad schemes. So I applied to 20 startups. One of them offered me a job, so I took that, and it was iPad till systems. So very random, not an industry I'd expected myself going into. But it turned out to be a fantastic and very kind of formative experience. So I was the second hire on the commercial side, and over 3 years we grew to 70 people, launched in the US and Australia, and then pretty spectacularly, fell apart. They actually since recovered and sold to Revolut, but my chapter definitely ended in failure. And we got a lot wrong with culture there. We got a lot wrong with hiring, plenty of other things as well. So anyway, coming towards the end of that in 2019, I was running growth at the time, flying around the world to set up all these offices and spending all day on my phone. And I really started to just kind of lose my joy for life. I've always very much a kind of glass half full kind of guy, but really just kind of was laughing less, was smiling less. And a friend of mine saw this and recommended a silent retreat he'd done in the Himalayas. And I initially kind of laughed this off. What would the guys at work think, or all of this kind of thing. But eventually got myself out there, and it was this very picturesque Buddhist temple on top of a mountain. And the best thing about it was when you get there, they take your phone off you, and you just spend 10 days cut off from the outside world. So it was, an incredible experience and very cliche, but I came back from that and quit my job a week later. And that was off the back of a conversation with Ben, who's my now co-founder. So we were colleagues first, but then friends. So he was actually the first hire at this startup, and he'd left the year before, but we'd kind of stayed friends, and we'd always I think we kind of thought at some stage we might start a business together. But to Molly's point, I also wasn't particularly looking to start a business. It just kind of happened. But yeah, we were chatting about it. Ben is not the kind of guy you'd find a silent retreat anytime soon. And we spoke about how, there's a lot of stigma around retreats and meditation. And so much of the benefit is just getting people offline and into nature. And so, yeah, just saw a really interesting opportunity to kind of solve or tackle that problem, should I say. And so yeah, came up with Unplugged. And, as you may know, we put cabins an hour from city life. People go literally padlock their phones in a box. We give them a map and a Nokia and leave them to it. And they spend 3 nights offline in nature. So it's a kind of full digital detox. So we're somewhere between accommodation and a retreat. But, again, there's a lot of kind of, I think retreats are really just not psychologically accessible to a lot of people. Like, not many people are really up for that kind of thing. So it's really about taking the people who are burnt out living in London and just giving them a chance to switch off, because it's hard.
And I love the fact you reflect on this sort of, I did this cliched thing, went to the Himalayas, and now I'm building a retreats company with unplugged sort of cabins and glamping and so on. But it's also the medicine that people need, and you needed, and now you're helping others with. And for anyone who's interested in like how you tell a story about an experience, in this case, the sort of halfway between retreats and a accommodation in the countryside, Unplugged, Hector and Ben and his team are nailing it. So check it out. And just the language and the communication, and it's so good around the expectation management of what you're going to get, because you're going to, there's plenty of great glamping places in nature, but they don't say we're going to lock your phone away, and they don't say you're here to unplug. So it's very deliberate, which I think you're doing a great job with. So Hector, tell us briefly before we move on to Jim's story about like your team. How do you practice what you're preaching or selling?
Yeah, for sure. So I really think it comes from, the founders fundamentally. Like we're a team of 5 now, and it's I think it's hard as a founder of a business to not be always on, because there is a very kind of fun, addictive element of it. But I do think that if we want people to kind of switch off, then kind of practicing that ourselves. So great example is I try and go to our cabins every 3 months and actually do the digital detox, and for example, I actually won't send emails over the weekend or in the evenings. I understand Molly's point, but there can be expectation, and again, it all depends how you communicate your team. But to take an extreme example, if your boss is Steve Jobs is firing off emails to you at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the night, then you kind of feel like you have to respond to that in some cases. So I think actually kind of practicing it yourself, so much of culture comes from what you're doing yourself, whether that's how flexible you are as a company or how you switch off as a company. But fundamentally you can say everything and you can write everything on your careers page on the website, but it's all about how you actually act, as the individuals, because companies are just a group of people, really.
And it reminds me a little bit, and I don't know if this company is on your site, Molly, Doisy and Dan, which is a lovely little chocolatier business brand. And I remember meeting those guys at the start, and I said, how are you running things? How are you operating? Because building a food business is so full on, right, early on. And they were like, yeah, we work 9 till 5 days a week, and that's it. And I was like, well, hold up, what do you mean? Because there's so much pressure. And they do it as the founders, and they clock in, clock out. That's their way of doing it. And there's no email, there's nothing outside. And so everyone that's come in since has followed that. And if it falls apart outside of that, it falls apart. And I said, do you really do this in practice? And they said, yeah, we do it. We've done it from the start. And as a result, they've stayed calm, built a successful business at the same time. So there are different ways. Thanks so much, Hector. Jim, it's great to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about your journey to building Betterspace and how you formed a team.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry again for being late. I really want to go on Hector's 3-day wilderness retreat. That sounds so good. So my journey is I've been an entrepreneur for about 21 years. Well, since 2000, 22 years. And I've done about 5 ventures over that period. But this journey began 4 years ago when I lost my 6th friend to suicide. And the thing I learned from that was it's incredibly hard to help somebody when they're in deep distress, that actually the time to help somebody is much earlier on, and where you can prevent them getting into that point in the first place. So that was really my interest. And I joined something called Zinc. I don't know if you guys have come up with Zinc, which is an amazing thing. I joined the first ever mission of Zinc. And for those who don't know, Zinc's like a sort of tech for good business builder. And the first mission was mental health, so very fitting for me. And there I teamed up with my bearded Sardinian co-founder called Alfredo, who's like a tech guy. And we spent about 6 months just really doing system analysis on why is there a rise in mental illness in society? Where does power lie in the system to change that? And our question was, what does the Tesla for mental health look like? That was our kind of question. And the more we looked at it, the more we realized that modern life is kind of undermining our pillars of well-being. So it's undermining our sleep. We're taking less exercise. Our diet is not as nutritious as it used to be. We're losing our habits and our hobbies. We have more stress. We have phones that ping and lots of things make us more stressful. We were looking at how do you start to replenish those pillars, and we kind of concluded that the system actor with the power is actually the employer, because actually the majority of the adult population is in employment. So therefore we were kind of looking, how does the employer build work that gives more to your mental health than it takes, which is a very sort of simple thing. And it's quite, it should be obvious. Work should be good for your mental health because it's productive and it looks after you financially. But actually so often it isn't that. And so we kind of then dug further and said, how can an employer better support employee mental health? Now, culture is a huge part of that. And we do a lot internally that I'd love to share. But specifically, we wanted to help employers help their employees build well-being habits, things that would improve their resilience, that would make them less likely to end up in a place where these 6 friends of mine ended up.
And it's what I love about both of Zinc and what you've done with that is the deep research into like why we need to do this and how we're going to do it. So what does Betterspace look like today, Jim? And what's the team?
Yeah, so we're a team of 22 people. We're quite remote. We do have offices. We have X and Y that we can all go to. So it's kind of up to you how you want to work. We have really what you would simply call a well-being benefits marketplace. So all the best things for the mind, from prevention through to recovery, from apps to books to Rebel Book Club to just a whole about 600 things for each employee, personalized to each employee, where the employer is only paying for what they use. So it's very capital efficient model. It's kind of new category in the market. We launched a year ago. We've got 25 clients, supporting about 20,000 employees. Got clients like Accenture, Linklaters. So it tends to be the very progressive employers who are feeling the great resignation. They're seeing well-being as a core part of their employee proposition, and they want to kind of go deep into supporting their well-being.
And the cynic would say, and it's really exciting, by the way, what you're building, and we're part of it, and we've seen the inside of it, and it's very user-friendly from a partner's point of view. But the cynic would say, hold on a second, these employers are just paying for their staff to access well-being, when they want it. It's not really an internal culture shift there. How do you work with these businesses to show that it's actually more than that, or what are you seeing them do?
Yeah, and look, I think the cynic would be right. If all you do is give them better space, if you're a law firm where people work absolutely crazy hours, they have no time to look after their well-being, and you give them better space, it's almost an insult. Culture is so critical. So this tends to work well with employers who have a well-being culture in place, that are building psychological safety within the organization, that have whole variety of cultural initiatives that add up to something. So I think you're exactly right to say that. We don't want to be a sticking plaster. We kind of really want to work with companies who are creating the time, giving people permission to look after their well-being. Then Betterspace works really well.
Fantastic. So you're all building businesses that are actually helping people in this world of a better type of employment experience, or at least a recovery from it in Hector's place. But what I want to move to now is like how we go from that core founding team. So Molly and is it Morris? Morris, yeah. Hector and Ben and Jim. How many co-founders did you start with?
One other, Alfredo.
Oh yes, the bearded Sardinian. Yes. So you also. So how did you go from that initial co-founder, the two of you, to employing your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and now I know you're beyond that, Molly and Jim. So Molly, what was that sort of strategy to getting onboarding your first couple of team members?
Yeah, so it started as Morris and I as co-founders, and we actually do have a third co-founder called Tim, who is our technical co-founder. And the realization for us was we couldn't build Flexa. We would have to consider outsourcing it. We knew that it would be harder to raise without a technical co-founder, and we didn't want the risks of it being very far away and being very expensive to build by other people. So we were very fortunate to find Tim, who was an amazing developer and had just sold his business to Oliver Wyman and was doing an earn out there. And he came across us on AngelList, of all places. Wow. We met him for a coffee, told him the idea, and he was like, yep, I'm in.
So you listed Flexa on AngelList, not because you were quite ready to raise, but just to prepare for that moment.
To find a CTO specifically.
Okay.
So we said that. We met him. He was like, yeah, wicked, I'm in. And then we started building it. I think that was October 2019, and we launched in February 2020.
Okay. And that was a very like an MVP, or was it?
It was very much an MVP. We were still working. I was working part-time, Morris was contracting, Tim was working full-time. We definitely didn't, sack in our jobs and then decide to go with this. Like, we wanted to prove it to ourselves that had traction and that people actually wanted it. So we set ourselves a target with that MVP of 8,000 users and 25 trial companies. And we said that we wanted to achieve that hopefully in 6 months. We got there in 10 weeks, which was very exciting.
What was the hack that led to the fast growth?
We launched with users. So we put a small amount of Google ad spend behind a landing page that basically said what we were doing, got people to sign up to it. And that meant that we had liquidity on both sides to actually launch with. And I think once you have obviously sort of a marketplace, more B2B2C, and that you need that in order to grow. You can't just wait for people to trickle in slowly. So that was definitely one. And I hate the word hack, but like hack that actually did.
Whatever word we want to use to describe getting that momentum at the start.
And then otherwise it was really never underestimating the power of brand equity and marketing and just saying yes to everything and getting yourself everywhere.
And when you're in that kind of messy, I know messy is the right description, but when some of you are still working, you're like, I mean, this is obviously the world that you love, Molly, and it's all going on in different times. But for some people, they find that transition really hard, right? So it's like, you're working full time, I'm part time. He's got that equity, she's getting that like wage. We're trying to bring on someone else, CTO. He's coming in with more skills. How do you figure that bit out?
Focus on the stuff that once you make the decision, you can't go back on it. You're going to like totally stress yourself out by trying to make the right decision for everything. You just need to focus on the stuff that if you make that decision and it's wrong, then it's a big fuck up. If the rest of it is small decisions, then don't stress as much about it, like prioritize it and try as hard as you can to just sort of go with the flow and learn from what's happening, because you'll think that you have the right idea for things. You think that you know the answer. And then 2 weeks later, 2 months later, you'll realize that you absolutely didn't. So trying to learn as much from the mistakes as well as the right decisions. Actually kind of
being
sometimes.
obviously open. And Jim, has that been the same for you as you built your team out? Has it been just like, look, this is where we're going, come and join us, we can't make promises, or how have you structured it?
I mean, I think we wanted to see if we could pilot this, if there was an employer who was willing to do that, and we found Linklaters who are willing to do it with 50 people. That enabled us to raise a bit of money, and with the money we raised, we then hired our probably first 2 or 3 people, and then Alfredo built a very basic platform that allowed it to be tested. We got really high engagement rates off that. Linklaters were really happy with it, so that enabled us to raise a bit more money and hire a few more people. And we did some more pilots. Then we did a much bigger pilot with Linklaters, got really outstanding results, and then we raised a bit more money again, and then so I think by that point, we hadn't brought in a VC yet. Then we launched the platform with a team of about 10 just over a year ago, and we launched with Accenture and various others, and then that enabled us to raise a VC round. So we've raised about 3 million by this point.
And for those that you brought on from beyond you and Alfredo, were they all just simple paid structured jobs, or was there equity discussions, or was there vesting options? Like, how did you, without going to the details of them, but like in terms of your strategy, what did you do?
Yeah, we've always had a policy of giving options to key people, which we've done from the beginning, and I think it's really important. But I think the most important thing for us has been the mission. So we're on a mission to tackle the mental health crisis. That attracts people who share that personal mission, and I think that's really been the glue between all of us, because it's always so damn hard and stressful setting up a new business. And it's where people's personal missions and the business mission align that you get that kind of glue, that people are just going to put in whatever it takes to get things over the line. I think it's the mission that's the glue.
And I will come to you, Hector, in a second on the same question. But in terms of practicing what you preach, or helping the problem that you're trying to resolve in the world not happen in your team, how do you manage that so that you are a healthy working culture?
Is that to myself or Jim?
No, I was going to stick with Jim on this one, and I want to come to you. Sorry, then come to you, Hector. So I just say, so Jim, obviously your mission there is very clear. The pain point for why you started it. How are you making sure that stays embedded into your culture, so that people who are passionate work? Because you see this point that happens sometimes, that people are very passionate, they work really hard on a mission-driven business, and then burnout can come, or we haven't got enough cash in the business, or we haven't got other technical stresses. So how have you managed that so far?
Yeah, we are constantly working on it, and we're lucky to have our chief operating officer, Helen, is really passionate about culture. So we did last week a team day in Birmingham where we all worked on our personal purposes, how they relate to the company purpose. We're constantly doing that, but we also have a number of sort of structural things in place. So we have well-being time. So everyone has 4 hours a week that they can use to do things that are good for their well-being, from having a nap to going for a walk to chatting with a friend. We give everyone £50 a month on Betterspace that they can spend on things that are good for their well-being. But I think it's probably the most important thing. And I did do a kind of a LinkedIn post on this before we came on, and I asked my team to kind of just say what was most important to them. And I think the themes that came across is well-being is part of the culture, not added on.
Right.
Psychological safety. So every week we rate our well-being for last week from 0 to 10. This week I was 4, which is one of my lowest scores. And then you go in and explain why that was. People share incredible things like, very personal things. And every time someone shares something, that gives permission for other things to share, other people to share things. And it creates this culture where you can just be completely open. You can be completely yourself. And that people love. And we have like stand-ups every day, but in their different formats. Two of them, you can't talk about work, and you're randomly allocated to different people on Zoom. So you just have to build relationships. So I think it's a combination of being really intentional and constantly creating these moments for the mission and personal missions to be considered, as well as structural as well, things that just constantly keep people on it.
That's great to hear, and that's really helpful. Thank you, Jim. And that saying down here on the chat, well-being, yes to well-being, part of the culture, not an add-on. It's like this whole thing with, what CSR or charitable aspects of businesses used to be. Like, we'll do that with whatever at the end, rather than what we're seeing now, purpose-driven. We're trying to solve a real problem in the world at the center. So yeah, all power to those shifts. Hector, in Unplugged world, what's your sort of working values? Because you are like, you've got to get bums on seats or bums in cabins, right? You've got capacity goals to hit. What happens when you get behind those? How do you get your team to drive forward?
Yeah, for sure. So it's we kind of came at it from an interesting place, because we had seen culture, people, etc. go so wrong at this previous startup. And so wrong is a bit dramatic, but fundamentally, I think Jim touched on a really important phrase there, which is psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And I think the good cultures, the bad cultures, it's almost binary in terms of that's what really kind of divides it. So really, we kind of came into this a little bit scarred, to be honest, from the previous experience, and very cautious in terms of how to go about building that team. So for the first year after launching, it was just myself and Ben. In hindsight, I maybe would have brought someone in a bit earlier, but I think what that really did allow us to do is really get stuck into all of the different parts of the business and just figure out, get a good understanding for how everything works, so you can then bring in people better than you to run it, really. So yeah, we did that for the first year, and then we brought in a head of operations, and have since brought in a kind of head of growth, and just a head of marketing now as well. So we were a team of 6 people now, and I think who you hire is super, super important for culture. And some of the things we really look for is like just nice people. I think that is actually just really important, because nice people who are also egos is another big one. Like people who are just humble, because like you get a big ego in there, and you can do all of the team building activities.
And the challenge is like typical recruitment processes they're the opposite of those two things, right? You have to forced to shout about yourself, or the ones that shout the most get the most attention. So what have you recruited for those two core values? Yeah,
for sure. So really just try and turn the kind of the initial conversation into a conversation, so rather than kind of keeping it too frameworky and focus on, I think it's very easy to like focus on filling out a Google Doc that you can then be shared with the team, and you kind of lose sight of the person you're actually talking to. So if you really kind of chat with someone, you can usually get a good idea of who they are as a person. One of my favorite interview questions, which is again a massive cliche, is what's your weakness when it comes to work? Just because it's so revealing what people say to that. Some people literally cannot come up with an answer for that, or like it's not a real answer. And I think you just want that level of self-awareness, because actually I do think it can be developed. So if someone can't answer it now, then there's always stuff they can do to work on that. But if you haven't got that level of self-awareness, then when things go wrong, because I really think good culture is about that psychological safety. Fundamentally, it's about being able to fail, and failure is just the start of a conversation. Okay, why did this thing go wrong? It's no one's fault. As soon as you get into the kind of blame game, is what happened at our previous startup. It was whose fault is this? Why are sales down? And you are no longer thinking about how do we solve this problem and what's actually going on, and you're no longer like kind of on the team trying to solve that, because fundamentally it's when cultures go wrong, it becomes you're competing, not collaborating, and I think that's really easily done. So it's how do you maintain that collaborative environment, and who you bring into that is everything, especially the first few hires, because your first, I don't know, 5-10 hires, if you're growing a lot as a company, they're going to go on to hire 10 more people, and if if they have characteristics or tendencies that you don't want in your culture at scale, then you can bet it's gonna get there. So yeah, who you hire is super important. I think I would hire slow in that regard. Sometimes you've got to make a quick decision, you've got to get it done in a week, but really think about it, because it's the people coming into the business are the biggest impact on where you're going.
When Sam is asking this question here, is we've heard this phrase, hire slow, fire fast. What's our feelings on that? That sounds like, Hector, that's your sort of thinking. I'm sure you're not in the firing fast stage of your business yet, but
yeah, we fortunately everyone we've hired has worked out, and we're in a good place there. But I definitely believe fire fast. If it's not working, it's best for everyone involved if you end it. Like if you're feeling bad about it, they're probably feeling bad about it as well. So just rip off the Band-Aid, because it affects everyone.
Wait, is it not, Molly? You're nodding along. So it's a simplistic approach, but do you agree in essence?
Yeah, of course, there are different nuances and different circumstances. And I do partially agree with Zamir's point of like, have you done everything to help them? But equally, there is a limit to how much you need to help as an employer. I think if someone is unable to do their job, or is the opposite of what Hector says, nice people that are humble, there's a limited amount that you can actually do. And I think that especially when you're small, as a startup, having one person who is either unable to do their job will have a massive impact on your productivity and success as a team. And also somebody who isn't a nice person and doesn't respect or appreciate people definitely shouldn't be allowed to stay in that company, because it can very quickly ruin the culture.
Absolutely. I just wanted to come back on something that Jim said around psychological safety and scoring himself 4 out of 10. And then before the end of this, in a few minutes, I want us to do a day in a life of our own work culture from our perspective, and share that with people. So Jim, you said you scored yourself a 4 out of 10. I'm sure we've been there. I know sometimes, maybe it's completely different for you, but I sometimes log on or come back to work, and I'm like, it's not quite where I hoped it would be, whether it's the numbers or there's a bit of negative feedback. And they're always, the small things, and they trigger this feeling of like, oh, but we wanted to be here, and we set our plan in this direction, and it's not quite going, or we haven't got the momentum that we'd hoped to have by, Q2 or whatever it is. So how do we all in those situations not pass that on? Because I feel like sometimes I'm not very good at dealing that with myself first, and then going, okay, I'm recognizing this feeling, I'm going to share it with the team, but I don't want to start with this feeling of like, lowness, and sort of like, it's sluggish. I want to come in and help give the energy. What's your reflections on when you do feel like that? I'd love to just go around the circle. So Jim, how do you deal with that yourself and your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think by being very open and honest about where you are, and trusting your colleagues with that information. So when I scored myself 4 out of 10 for last week, there was a lot of stress going on in the business, but I also have a daughter with anorexia at home, and these are really complicated things, and I really trust my colleagues with that information. I guess I'm trusting you guys with that information as well. And I think when you go into that very open world of trust, when you kind of have to build trust by sharing, and then people receiving well, then you can be crazy open, I find. I mean, we have really open conversations with not just about personal life, but also about work and what we think about life, what we think about what we're doing at work, and is our sales strategy working. So I think it's really establishing that very open culture, trusting each other, but it's a lot of work. You have to really keep at it every day to get there.
Yeah, it's great. It's just I'm just listening to you all tonight, and I'm seeing this in the comments as well. People are just really reassured that, like, oh, people who start businesses really do care about their teams as well as the mission as the business. I know they're integral, right? Molly, when you're feeling frustrated, down, whatever it is related to work, how do you deal with that with your team?
I think it's a really good question, and I think, Jim, obviously what you do totally works for you, and you've built that culture. But for me, I actually disagree with sharing everything. I think that I feel, and I think it's very personal and subjective, I feel that I have a duty of care to my employees to make sure that they feel secure and happy and that they don't take my stress with them. So I tell some stuff, when I think that it's appropriate to do so. But, we've been 6 weeks away from running out of money. Did they know that? No.
6 weeks? That's ages, Hector.
And if we'd actually thought, we're not going to be able to, we could have made that last. We would have been able to pay people for much longer than that. But at the current burn rate that we were at, and because of the fact that we could have kept paying people for 6 months, we were like, well, we're not in a position where we need to put that stress onto people. That was our stress to bear. And I think that's the same with, when you're not meeting projections, you're having difficult conversations with investors. If they needed and wanted to know that, then they'd be starting their own business and be happy and willing to put up with that level of stress. But people go into careers and jobs, I think, for some level of security and for some ability to switch off at the end of the day. And of course, I know that you can manage those conversations and make sure that people don't worry and they'll trust you as a leader. But for me, I would feel quite uncomfortable with them knowing that, because I know in their position, I would take their stress onto me.
And if it's related directly to what you're working on with the team and you're really frustrated, how do you deal with that particular when it is out in the open amongst you?
Yeah, I think you have to really check yourself and make sure that you're not blaming. You're not getting frustrated with somebody because you're frustrated with the situation. So I think being very introspective and very conscious of how you're reacting to people in that, and ultimately giving people a space to be able to brainstorm and have ideas and come to a conclusion together. I think it's really, really important, rather than you just like flapping and panicking. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your job as a founder to save it. So you can't really take everything out on people. I think it's trying to treat those situations as constructively as possible, get everybody's brains in, because 10 brains are better than one.
Yes.
But ultimately, if it's really stressful, like that is your stress to sort out.
Yeah, and something that I've seen working really well in our little team is, and shout out to Anchor and Emily here, who I work with regularly on Rebel Book Club, is that when I'm like, oh, this is really annoying, this has happened, and their reflection is obviously, this is so interesting that they see it this way, and it's like, rather than this personal sort of attack on us as an organization, which doesn't happen much for Rebel Book Club, but it's more a case of like, oh, is it interesting that campaign didn't work, but there's something going on here. And so I think it's finding that balance, isn't it, in your conversations. So we've run out of time, but I want to go once round and just ask you all about your day and your kind of work life, so people get an insight into some realities here. So Hector, you wake up in a jacuzzi in a field.
Yeah.
You do 3 hours of mindfulness. Then you do a couple of emails, and then you're like, great, back to the cabin to read 3 books.
It's something like that. So we're pretty kind of flexible in how we work, very much inspired by everything Molly and the team are doing, because it has really become apparent just how different everyone does work. So we, as a company, we meet, and I'm not directly answering your question, we try and get FaceTime Mondays and Fridays, just to kind of really hash it out and kind of
FaceTime IRL, not through an app.
Real life.
Okay.
We're in a position we can do that, and everyone's pretty up for that, but I know that doesn't apply to all teams. But yeah, in terms of my day, I do practice what I preach. So I try and stay off all devices between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. I know we've run over today, but I'll leave it off for another hour tomorrow morning to make up for it. So I the morning I will take off, and then still, being a founder, I'm still thinking about work. I'm still like writing, walking, kind of pondering. And then like me and so everyone really is kind of left to their own devices. Honestly, we just the people we have in the team, everyone's kind of trusted and empowered, and I think the environment is very much that. So in terms of how I work, my co-founder Ben is the kind of guy who will sit down with a problem and really just figure it out in 8 hours, whereas I will fret over the problem. Oh god, this seems like a lot of work, and then I'll talk to some people and then eventually an idea might pop up. So it's really interesting how different even the two of us are at working. So I spend most of my day kind of flitting around, meeting people and chatting and generally pondering, and every now and again I try and get a bit of work
you
done.
See everyone, and this guy's a successful founder. He's just flitting around having conversations all day. He's building a killer brand and business. It's possible.
And then my
I know you're a hard worker, Hector. You're underplaying yourself,
really
but yes, I get that your approach is different to what your business partners is, which is great.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, it's such I'm in constant just haven't really made up my mind on what you kind of feel guilty sometimes, but then I also think you have to lean into how you best work, and just challenge the assumptions that, hey, you need to work a 9 to 5 and everyone needs to be sitting in an office together, and Molly can talk more about this than me, but it's really about are you making the stuff happen that needs to happen. Again, like at my previous startup, I was running growth for the last year, and I wasn't particularly good at it, or any of my roles there. And I would, to make up for that, I'd just work all the time. And I think a lot of that was driven by insecurity. It was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to get really busy. And I still don't work that much now, but I still waste a lot of time. Like I can spend 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon just wasting time on emails. I call it wasting time, but busy work creates busy work, So actually, there's probably just 1 or 2 things that really need to happen today, and there's just a lot of noise. Like even now, my inbox is just full of lots of noisy things that I'm trying to get myself to archive, but I just can't quite bring myself to do it. So
I think there's a whole nother discussion, but this idea of like the 3 things that really need to happen. In order for those 3 things to happen, lots of meandering and wandering and interactions have to happen elsewhere. And then, this idea that you can do 100 productive things in a day is, and it for be to sustainable and not burn out and everything else is a myth, I think, from what I've seen so far. Jim, give us a quick insight into your working day.
So I wake up at 6:30, go for a run every day for about half an hour, listening
every day. Humans, I didn't think they existed. I thought it was all a myth.
I love
every day.
It totally sets me up. I listen to good podcasts. Like this morning, I was listening to Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Which is really good. And then I have a couple of hours of just quiet time working, and then we have our daily stand up at 9:30, and then it's a whole bunch of Zoom calls, really Zoom and working through till usually like 7. Then I'll play cards with the kids, have dinner, might do a little bit more after dinner. But it's to me, none of it's work. When people talk about work-life balance. I stopped working about 10 years ago when I started working on purpose-driven things, and they're just things that I care about. I care passionately about them. But and I think that really helps from a kind of burnout point of view. If you really enjoy what you're doing, then
Yeah, and it comes back to what you were saying at the top, Molly, about the work-life blend. So tell us a little bit about what your daily blend looks like. I'm sure it shifts in multitudes, but typically.
Very flexible. I'm not a morning person, so I wake up 8:30 or 9, take the dog for a walk, grab a coffee, on Slack and emails that entire time. I'm not really an example of like how to manage work and life, but at the same time, it does work for me. And when I've tried to divide it up, it actually has been negative for my mental health. So I think it's about knowing what works. We have an office. So sometimes we'll go there if we feel like it. Other times we won't. No one else goes apart from once a month because they're all around the UK. But we needed that space away from home as a couple. So we'll go in, working emails. I go to the gym at lunchtime. just keep working until probably sometime between 5 and about 9, really varies. Maybe go play tennis or go for a run in the evening, cook some nice supper, carry on with emails and Slack. And that all just kind of repeats. And I think to the point of Hector's, where he said, the founder's behavior influences things. I think that is true, but just because you exhibit and role model one behavior doesn't mean that somebody will completely mimic it. Like how fluid and flexible my day is, I know shows to everybody else at Flexa that they can model their day however they want to. And it doesn't mean that they have to be checking notifications just because I do. It's about managing your time in a way that works for you. And we monitor that very, very carefully. Like if people are working late into the evening, you're doing this a lot. Do you have too much work? What time did you start? And they're like, oh, midday. I'm like, grand, like that's fine.
So you are checking in on those things. Yeah.
Always. And I think that's an important thing to do, is to check and to know when people are online and to know all the time what people are, feeling and thinking, and are they happy?
And with Flexa Careers and obviously in practice in terms of your business, but also the culture you're building. I think we've heard, of course, from Jim and Hector as well. This is a very clear antidote to everything that we're seeing in mainstream media at the moment, especially in the kind of, if you're not in the UK, but right-wing political press here is all about like this, we've got to end work from home culture and practice because COVID's over, in inverted commas. And actually what we've seen is like a lot of people who, unlike us, haven't had that world or that experience have now discovered part of it and are figuring it out and realizing it's better. And I'm currently, if anyone's interested, I always do a book recommendation just because The Nowhere Office. You guys probably don't need to read this because you're practicing it in brilliant ways. But it's reinventing work and the workplace of the future. And it's kind of like the story of how we got here and where we're going. So if you want to explore it, that's a good rec. Okay. Jim, Hector and Molly, thank you so much for giving us your flexible from home time this evening. You're all inspiring leaders. And as people have said in the chat tonight, they feel like it's so reassuring having people who care about their people as much as they care about their missions, and they all go together. So thank you. And good luck. And we will share all the links from your businesses with everyone who was on the call and who didn't make it as well. So go to the cabin, use Flexa Careers, and definitely get your well-being budget on Betterspace, or add your business to Betterspace if it's providing a well-being experience. Thanks, guys. Take care.